If HTML and JavaScript had a baby, that baby would be JSX. By the end of this video, we'll learn about what is JSX, how does it look like HTML, but it actually is JavaScript behind the scenes, what are the rules that we need to follow to make sure that we're not running into any errors, and how do we actually use it in our React applications. JSX is a syntax extension for JavaScript. It allows you to write UI in a declarative manner rather than the imperative way where we had to explicitly explain how exactly we want our UI to be created. In a way, it kind of looks like HTML, but it actually compiles down to JavaScript before it's able to be executed on the browser. Let's take a look at this real quick. So in a way, when you have a function like this that returns an H1 that contains the text test, this is what it kind of boils down to. It ends up being React.createElement. The type of element is H1, and the content of it, or the children elements of that, is test. If I come over here and I add a property like ID, you see how it adds that as an object. So basically that second property becomes an object of all the properties that we have on this H1. And so when you return a JSX expression like this one, you're actually returning an object that explains how this element or how this component is to be created. Now, for that to work, there are certain rules that we have to follow. One, every function that returns a JSX has to return one element only. So if we were to compile, or if we were to return multiple things, not just a single H1 as we have over here, we would need to wrap it either by a div like this one here, or by this fragment or a React fragment that allows us to then have another element within that will have some paragraph or some text. Rule number two, because this is actually JavaScript, when we're adding any property like class, for example, we'll have to use the JavaScript equivalent of it. And as you remember, when we were modifying the DOM manually ourselves, we had to create it using the class name property, which is the camel case version of that property name. So it would not be class, it will be class name, because as you know, class is a reserved word in JavaScript that would allow you to create classes. Third, because this is actually JavaScript, we're able to add JavaScript expressions within our UI elements here. So I could have something that looks like this, a curly bracket, and within that, I could have some expression that, for example, adds up the numbers 1 and 2, and it will work just fine. I can have a variable. So for example, here I have a greeting, which will be a string that says hello. And I can come over here, inject that string or that variable just like this, and it will work just fine. I'm able to even add functions, add loops, add if statements, all of that kind of stuff. We'll learn how we would be able to do that in JSX. So let's start building our application here. In this paragraph, I'm going to replace it with some sort of a greeting followed by the person's name. So let's go ahead and create another variable here, and let's call it name. I'll just put my name for now. And something like, you have pending tasks count tasks. So let's go ahead and create that as well. Pending tasks count equal 2. So when we save that, I'll get something that looks like this. Hello, Yahya, you have 2 tasks. Excellent. We can do something a little bit more complex where we can come over here. We can get the time of the day. And if it is more than 12, it'll say good afternoon. Otherwise, it will be good morning. Here we go. I'm recording this at 3:15 p.m. This is why it says good afternoon. Now, let me go ahead and add maybe another div with an ID of new task section or something like this, which will contain a label. That label will say add task. This will be associated with an input of type text. And we'll have to give it some sort of an ID or a name. New task. ID, new task. All right. So this is technically working, but as we know, we have to associate the label with the input for accessibility reasons. So for that, we used to use the for property. In our case here, we'll have to use HTML4. That is the equivalent of it in the JavaScript language. So in that case, this is the label for the new task input. Now, right now, this may not be doing anything yet, but we will fix that later on. Now, before I end my video here, let's do some code cleanup just so that the code looks and reads a little bit more naturally. So I'll create another variable here. I'll call this is morning. And this is where I will create my condition, or I'll define my condition. So in this case, it will have to be less than 12. And in that case, we would say, if it is morning, then we want you to say good morning. Otherwise, it'll read good afternoon. We could even add it so it captures the evening situations as well. So const is evening. And that will be the same condition, except that it will be if it is more than 17, which is 5 p.m. And in this case, I'll make this look like this. If it is morning, then it will say good morning. Otherwise, we'll add another check. If it is evening, then we want you to say good evening. Otherwise, it'll be good afternoon. Let's see if that works correctly. We save. Here we go. It still says good afternoon because that is my condition right now. Now, this can get a little bit difficult to read. So maybe what I need to do instead is create another function that will return get greeting based on time. And we'll copy that logic onto here. And we'll make sure that we are returning greeting. Now that I have this function, I can get rid of all of that over here. And I'll go into my code. I'll replace this with the function call. So we'll call get greeting based on time. And then depending number of tasks here, we save. Let's see what happens. Everything is looking great. Now, again, we did not solve the fact that this can read unnaturally for most people. So what I could do here is create a variable. We'll call this greeting, and we'll set this to an empty string, or we'll have a default of hello. And now we'll have an if statement. If is morning, then set the greeting to be good morning. Else, if is evening, then set greeting to be good evening. Otherwise, it'll be good afternoon. Now we don't need this variable anymore. We save it. Our logic still works correctly. Just so we can confirm that this is actually the ones coming back from our function here, let me just do a little typo for the good afternoon, just so we can see that is what comes back from this function instead. Fix it. And we're done here. You can see this is real JavaScript running inside of your UI, and it's a cleaner, safer way to interact with our UI in a way that kind of reads more naturally to us. And at the end of the day, we're still working with syntax or formats that looks natural to us or that is more familiar to us, which is HTML in this case. In the next video, we'll start building a functional component, or basically finish building our application using functional components, and we'll see how we can nest components to complete our application.